Hi, I'm Otter, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about the GetCommands function in the EDK utilities. So before you continue on in this video, if you are unfamiliar with sequence keys and unfamiliar with the EDK, please watch episode 1 and episode 2 before continuing on. Now that you've done that and you're back, let's go ahead and talk about this. So we had talked about sequence keys, and one of the things I had mentioned was using it for anything that's repetitive. So I have a text console open up here to a touch panel, one of a number of devices that I'm going to actually be doing the same thing with. And for my example here, it's commands like I want to set the time zone, I want to add a server, which means removing the existing server and then adding my preferred server, and then force a sync. Now there's a few other things you may want to do per individual device after that by using the command prompt and keep going, but for each device type, meaning a TS1070 or an Air Media or a scheduling panel, you may have a different sequence set. And instead of setting up sequence sets for all of them, I can show you a way where you can automate that using the GetCommand method. Fair warning, you cannot use this methodology to do things like set IP addresses, send files, or set IP tables. It's not what it's meant for. It's more along the lines for the same things you'd use sequence keys for. So let's jump into Toolbox here, and let's take a look at my sequence keys that I have called up. I've created a file called time zone, and I can run all of these commands on pretty much everything that ships from Crestron today, and they're going to respond to them. The thing about it is that this is non-typed, but it is for each one. And I would have to, if this was a requirement in the job, continue to do this through each one. So I set up my sequence keys, I go, I execute them, I make sure they work. That's the first thing you're going to want to do. For anything that we're going to want to do in the GetCommands part, you're going to want to validate the behavior, especially if it's something that may require a reboot to actually finalize, because you don't want to do a reboot in the middle of the process. What you want to do is you want to do everything and then fire off the reboot at the end. Once again, following the warnings. You don't want to do anything that's going to break communications with your device. So I'm going to go ahead and close Toolbox, and we're going to go take a look at a couple things. So in episode 1, I had talked about the scripts spreadsheet. Here we're going to talk about the command spreadsheet. And the first thing that I did is I made a copy of the command spreadsheet because I'm going to go off and modify this to my needs. Why? Because the command spreadsheet, if we go look at it, has a certain structure to it. And that structure is that on the first tab or sheet in the workbook, it's devices. And if you look, you'll see that there's a header and a piece, and then that says device and sheet. And then it's the prompt of the device. Yes, specifically the prompt. This is keyed off the prompt. You'll notice there's no lower cases here because that's the type of prompt it gets. So from like a Pro 4, I get a prompt of Pro 4. If you scroll through this list, you're going to find that there's a whole bunch of these, some of them current, a lot of them older product. So that means that the device is based on the prompt. So what the script does is it opens up this spreadsheet, looks for the prompt. If it gets that prompt, it then looks at the sheet that's assigned to that prompt and executes those commands. And if we go look at CS, you'll look at a whole bunch of stuff that's really familiar to you when you've talked to a control system, right? And you'll see that there's parameters included and stuff like that. This is kind of like for information gathering is how its kind of default thing is. But we're going to use it for something a little different. So that's the construct. So the very first thing I did was I went and I made a copy of the original. Why? So that I have something to revert back to. Dope moment is a definite possibility here. So what I did was I created a copy, and then I went and cleaned that up. So let me close this off, and let's go look at what my command spreadsheet looks like. So in my command spreadsheet, what I did was I have a devices, forgive all the jumping around, and you'll see these are the devices that are actually in my target group. Almost enough to make a system. There may be switches involved, right? There could be NVX. Anything that you want to add to this, you can. But the common practice is the exact prompt and a sheet that meets that device type. So here I have one called AM for air media, right? I have one CS, any control system. So if I had a Pro 4 or a CP4N and I wanted to execute, I would be executing off of the CS sheet. So that's the example. Device type, command set. So if we go look at the CS commands, there are the exact same ones that I had in my sequence keys, and we can fire those. But those aren't the only ones. Like I said, there are other ones you can do. In particularly, like when I thought about my touch panel in this scenario, I looked over and I thought, well, not only do I want to do that, I want to make sure that the app mode be general, because I'm going to eventually load a project to it. So I wanted to app mode disable, which basically puts it into the Crestron default mode. I wanted the auto brightness turned off. I wanted it to go into standby after 5 minutes. I wanted it to use a screensaver. And then because when I was working with the commands and validating them, the app mode does require a reboot. So I'm going to fire a reboot off of the end of that. You'll notice the rest of them have the basic stuff, and then I assigned a generic just to kind of point you that if you want to do everything and just do these time zone things, you could have just a generic sheet that has it. Now, the use of this tool comes in is that I would probably typecast the tool to the systems I was working with at that time. These are the pieces of equipment I'm working with. Like I said, I kind of did it in a semi-room configuration because if I had a whole bunch to do, I could do the auto discovery, grab everything, and as long as there was something in the device list and a command set for them, you basically take the whole darn IP list, drop it on over into on the script section from auto discovery, and off to the races, firing all of these commands off. So I'm going to save for fun. I'm going to close, and I'm going to go to my scripts spreadsheet. Remember, this is the spreadsheet that it uses for determining what it's going to connect to and what's going to act. And here we're going to work with the get devices commands, which uses the get command spreadsheet. And you'll notice that I modified my reports to create a subfolder in my reports folder. The reason is that this thing is going to create a text file per device connected to and list out the command and the response. So should something go sideways, you know where to find it. Or, oops, I shouldn't have tried to do that because that was a bad command on it. It's not like it'll exit out, it'll just skip through, but you will get a false out of it if it's not existent, if the device doesn't exist and you tried to connect to it in the list, these types of things. But nothing real dramatic, because once again, if we're careful with our commands, we're not going to break any communications. So in the get commands list, looks just like a lot of them, has a device list. So these are the IPs I'm going to connect to. So it's going to connect to the IP. It's going to use the device type from the command spreadsheet to determine if it needs to do something. And then if it does, it's going to send the commands that are in that sheet. That's the basic organization of it. Now let's save and close our scripts workbook. Open up our reports directory. Make sure our destination directory is there. If it's not, create it. Remember what you named it in the scripts. Go open that up. Launch the script runner. Get device commands, and we're gonna click run. And what's gonna happen is you're gonna see, boom, all of a sudden, there's a bunch of text files. Why? Because as it's connecting to them and running them, it's opened the file. Now it's gonna post all of the responses from the commands into the file. And when it's done, we'll get a comma delimited text file that basically tells us success or failure. So the script is completed running. And now if we wanted to verify everything, I could come in here, right? Oops. Double click, open it up, everything worked out. In other words, I did okay. And then if we just take a look at one of the files, and yes, I have opened these, you'll see that everything executed out. So there's the list and history. So there's the get commands. Super short, super sweet. Just remember, You're not going to use it to set IP addresses or any of that type of stuff. You're not going to try file transfers, and you're not going to do anything that breaks communications. This little jewel, I think, can help out. It's one of the tools that you can put in your toolkit to hopefully save you some time, energy, and effort. Always about that. Thanks for watching.